Okay. Yes, we're live. Excellent. Hello, welcome back to Book from Scratch, a YouTube live series where I'm teaching you, I guess, how to write a book, but I'm doing it live. So rather than a series of videos that are teaching you how to write this part of the book, that part of the book, to show, not tell, third person, first person, etc., etc., I'm just going to write my book from scratch, step by step by step, completely live. This is going to be, oh my goodness, hours of video. We're actually on the 13th episode, and so far we've planned a lot. We've done some characters, we talked about villains, stuff like that. And it's been a while since I've done this, so I apologise for the gap. Writing can be like that. I had to think. I'm still trying to think of what I do in each episode, so that's why it's been so long, and I apologise. So what we're going to do, I've said so many times already. That's not great. Either way, if you look over here, this is the breakdown of all the different sort of books that I'm squeezing into what's basically an anthology. So I've got about 10 books squeezed into a fantasy anthology, but each book is just a different genre, so I can show you how to write different genres and how they manifest when I'm typing, because I'm going to be typing live as well. And so far we've done a classic sort of fantasy right here. We've done a horror, a western set in a fantasy universe, a sci-fi that is set in a fantasy universe, plus the mystery, and we're going to do the thriller, a political kind of thriller today. And as you can see, these two are linked because this is going to be a two-parter kind of book within a book, because that's what an anthology is. And that's also just to show you how you might do that, how you leave a suitable cliffhanger, but set up everything in the previous book to aid the next one, the political thriller in this case. So we're going to get straight into it. Now I do have to, before I plan, because that's what you're going to watch. You're going to watch me plan it out today. I haven't gotten to the typing stage yet. Once I get like a plan for all 10 books down, I will start typing, and the little itty gritty details I haven't planned out yet they will manifest as I write. So I do have to keep in mind as I plan out the book today the theme of the story as a whole. Now what the theme is, it's all about how the little things perhaps matter more than the big things. So in a fantasy story you've got a lot of big things where there's this evil dark lord to be defeated, or the dragon has to be killed, stuff like that, or you have to prevent the interdimensional gateway from opening, unleashing untold horror into the world, etc., etc. That's the big thing. But if you watch, and this actually goes for a lot of different genres, if you watch these things, read these books, you'll notice that it's quite possible that the big bad thing could have easily been dealt with if a lot of little things had been done by the sort of heroes. Take Lord of the Rings, for example. In the third film, it's clear that Denethor, who's leading Gondor at this time, because he's a steward, he's not the king, he's a steward, he's like caretaker of the throne, and he's gone a bit mad. Because he looked into a ball that like kind of tells him the future, and who's being manipulated through it by the bad guy. Spoiler alert. And he went a bit loopy because he looked into it way too much, and he's now a terrible kind of ruler. He's making lots of bad decisions. He's kind of gone a bit melancholy. He's depressed. He's lost his favourite son. That's a whole other thing. But the people are still. And that's making Gondor weaker against the big bad Sauron, who's marching an army towards Gondor. And there's a line in the film, and this comes from different parts of the book, where Gandalf asks Denethor, "Where are Gondor's armies?" Implying that Denethor has not really been doing anything to galvanize Gondor to war. If you get a hint there, then that a terrible sort of ruler in charge of, because Gondor's kind of the most powerful nation at the time, I guess. Having a bad ruler in charge has weakened Gondor, making Sauron's army even more dangerous. And Denethor wasn't really replaced, even though he showed a lot of signs of madness, especially to his sons. But it's kind of like, oh, they were just too loyal to him. And there's also a sense that the institution of the Steward of Gondor isn't something you just mess around with on a whim. But if they, like, right at the beginning of when Lord of the Rings actually kind of starts with the Fellowship, if they had just, like, I think it's time just to get this guy off the throne, put someone in charge who can actually deal with Sauron, then Minas Tirith would have been much better prepared to fight off that siege. There would have been a much bigger army. The Theoden's Rohirrim would have had perhaps another cavalry like contingent from Gondor. That whole battle would have been so much easier. Like the ghosts would have got to Gondor and gone, oh, well, this has been dealt with, this is fine. And that's kind of the theme of this story, about how it's rather than sort of playing into the usual way you deal with these things that are keeping the good guys down, keeping them weak, we solve them so that when the big bad finally attacks with his massive army or his all-powerful weapon that he has or whatever, it's actually so much easier to defeat him. And that's to sort of warn us nowadays in our world that maybe we should be dealing with lots of these little things happening in our society that actually make us stronger, so that we can resist things like fascism, which is rising in our societies today. And that's what this book's theme is. And I have to think about this the whole time I'm planning it out so I can get it in there. Right, so we've also got our two main characters. I have to think about how our two main characters, now they're called Fortis and Huxton at the moment, and they are the drive behind seeing how solving little things actually impacts the big things and makes the big things so much easier to deal with. So they're kind of, throughout these books here, let's go these ones here, what they've been seeing is how when they impact and solve the little things, there's a longer period of peace. People are much happier, and they will see throughout how the main bad guy, who's just codenamed Bob for the time being, can be affected by resolving little things here and there. And there's also going to be a split in their party. So Fortis and Huxton are part of a big adventuring party, and like two of them are on Fortis and Huxton's side, but the rest are so traditional in their thinking that they believe that what they need to do is become more and more powerful. They need to go down the traditional route of adventuring and defeating bad guys and targeting the big bad guys, and also they're reveling in it, in like the hero worship they get. And there's going to be a split in this party in this book. So in this political thriller, that's the genre I'm going for today, in today's book, there is that split. And I have to think about that too. And also I have to think about how Fortis and Huxton they are creating the split. They have the tough decision to make of splitting the adventuring party, which could make the adventuring party weaker. We'll see. But it's through the eyes of Fortis and Huxton, the reader will see why it's necessary to deal with the little things. Instead of the traditional sort of way of doing it in a story where the little thing, if you just change it, so many problems are resolved. But a book kind of has to let this thing happen so that you get more action and adventure later. And you'll see where that manifests as I plan this out. So, before we move on actually to the planning, let's think about what actually makes a good political thriller a good political thriller. Which colour should I go with? I like that colour, we'll go with that one. So, what makes a political thriller a good thriller? So, I'm saying political thriller because it's going to involve some heavy politics. Don't worry, plenty of action too. This isn't like I can't think of anything anyway. Political, but we'll think political thrillers. But think of it as a thriller for the most part. So, what's the first thing that you need in your political thriller? Well, first you need politics. So, politics is kind of a stupid business if you think about it, because politics is it's all about the people in charge. One person, lots of people, doesn't matter. They're all trying to balance the various groups within a society and use their power to enforce their decisions to maintain balance, or if one group has more power than the other in society than another group, to maintain that social strata. But there always has to be some balance, because if you think about Britain, for the last 1,000 years, I mean, it's hard to believe it's still going on. There's always the king, his nobles, who are the richest, most powerful landowners, and then everyone else, basically. And even though the king had most of the money, and they had the authority given to them by the religious situation, the political situation, the government, the law, the king could still be deposed if every single noble just decided, we don't like this guy, we'll raise an army using our power, our money, and the law that allows us to raise money, and all the people who are beneath us who we can turn into an army, fight the king, king deposed, new king presumably, and the whole system restarts. But even that, the king and the nobles have to be wary of the fact that there's a huge number of people who can just grab a pitchfork, grab a torch, let's go kill them all. And that could easily happen because it's difficult because you have to convince thousands, millions of people just to rise up, but it's still there as a potential threat. And so there's like Britain, for example, maintained that balance by a society sort of like an education or like a vibe that all the sort of low-level peasants and serfs and whatever should accept their lot, and that the people above them were supposed to be there, and the king was supposed to be the king. That broke down over history, and what happened is the lower classes get more power, the nobles come down a bit, the king comes down a bit, but there's a new balance, and politics is all about maintaining that balance. But then, if a bunch of the lower classes suddenly realise, oh, we've earned a bit more money by being merchants, for example, who are better at making money than the nobles who just tax whoever's on their land for money, then now they've got a bit more power, the balance is readdressed. And so politics is all about maintaining a balance, even if it's hierarchical. And it's also about, like, modern day politics is about taking this group's rights, this race's rights, this religion's rights, this class's rights, and balancing them all. And it's kind of a stupid business because it's all about, because usually one group is the most powerful and they're trying to keep their power even though they don't deserve to be the most powerful. And you could easily imagine a society where, wait a minute, why don't we just try and create the most neutral sort of legal code that affects everyone, which we're nearly at, and let's just make sure money is accessible to everyone. People can rise to the top, people can fall to the bottom, so that's a bit fairer, and everyone should have a basic allotment of either money or resources so that no one is homeless, no one is in poverty, no children aren't dying of malnutrition, things like that. We could have standards, but politics isn't about that. Politics is about balance, because if the balance shifts, you might get conflict or riots or wars, civil wars, things like that. So political thrillers thrive on there being politics. If you have a society that's perfect, it's utopia, there's really no, or let's say almost a utopia, because all utopian fiction also has a caveat, then you still need some politics so that you can you can have people vying for more power, which produces interesting situations, betrayal, backstabbing, manipulation, like playing the law against someone, or just being smarter than someone else. And those are fascinating, interesting books to read, which is why I'm doing one here. But you need the politics. So if you're going to do a political thriller, make sure you're writing in a situation where politics matters. You have different groups vying for different things. And to take Game of Thrones, for example, that it's set up to have this big bad off in the distance somewhere that no one is focusing on, while the politics is all about great houses vying for power. But there is a central question. You could just be, it's not just about watching all these different groups battle one another, politically manipulate each other through codes of society or religious necessity or legal shenanigans. There's also the theme going of who should actually be ruling. And you, the reader, the watcher, are asked to think about that throughout as you see different leaders do what they do. But it's also interesting to see bad leaders at the beginning become better leaders at the end. Of course, it all got fluff. It's all complete nonsense now, but it's a well-known good political thriller in a fantasy universe. So politics is kind of a stupid business because it's all about some other group wanting more power. Sometimes that's good because a lower class people should have more power in the system. It's unfair for them not to, but don't forget, it's also about groups wanting more power for the sake of more power. But that's what makes political thrillers interesting. So make sure you've got politics there, and interesting politics as well. Second should be high stakes. Politics may be a stupid business. It may be terrible the way we do it nowadays. I think, but it's always high stakes because whoever's left in charge is going to set the tone for a society going forward. Even if it's like, say, a community organisation, there's politics there. Okay, even on that small scale, but it's high stakes. Whoever becomes in charge of that community organisation, because whoever's running it now will take it in this direction. And what if that only benefits 30% of the people in that community, and the other 70% are at a loss? Now there's conflict, but it's still high stakes because it's important to people. For example, let's think bigger. For example, one faction feels unsafe, so they call the nation feels unsafe. So let's get a larger army to be built, and your main characters could be keen on this. So throughout the story, they're working to achieve that faction's rise to power, so it can happen. The stakes are, if the army is built, could that actually trigger the very war that people were worried about? Or if it isn't built, does that mean that the nation is now going to be definitely attacked because they're weaker? So that's a very high stakes political game. And then you could also say, what if the faction who wanted a bigger army were actually the bad guys? Now the stakes can be seen from other characters who are warning about this bigger army because it's actually only there for the more powerful people to utilize as a weapon against everyone else to take control. So you have the high stakes of like armies and militaries and who's in charge, but you can also have high stakes in the small scale community. In this book I'm writing, this political thriller, but also the wider fantasy story, the stakes are this. In this particular book, if the wrong leader remains in charge, Bob, the big bad guy, will have more control over the nation, weakening the good guys, making that epic final battle harder for the good guys, when it shouldn't be. But, the reason why stories make things harder for the good guys is because it's more thrilling, and at the end, I'm still going for a thrilling part of the end, part of the conclusion, but I'm trying to come at it with my theme in mind. Yeah, that's the stakes. Bad leader in charge. Bob has an easier time of taking over the world. That means more death, more destruction. So that's the stakes. And that's what I'm going to put in this book. What's next? 3 unpredictable terms. Unpredictable. Turns, sorry, not terms. Politics and a good political thriller should have lots of twists and turns, backstabbing and betrayal and manipulation. Real world politics is like this, and good characterization will aid this. Readers will attempt to predict what people are going to do and also come up with their own theories of what should happen, and they'll feel great when what they predicted happens, but they'll also feel satisfied that a smart good characterization produced a completely different outcome that they didn't see coming, but is completely viable. So you need those unpredictable turns that manifest as characters deciding at some point, I'm going to stab this guy in the back and hurt them, which then creates other drama that you can write about. Also, you need to think about how a character can manipulate and then do the big reveal of how that manipulation worked. But also, people should change their minds anyway when they're convinced that they are wrong. And I think this isn't a comprehensive list, but I think the next thing in a good political thriller should be that they are thought-provoking. That they should get people thinking about what they want, how this politics manifests in the real world. Because if you watch, going back to the Game of Thrones example, for example, going back there, if you watch or read the books, you start thinking, well, I'm on the Stark side, because the way they want to run society is with honour and to the letter of the law. And it's shown that's quite a good thing, but it's also shown that it's naive, because in the real world, very few people are working to what's honourable and decent and to, say, the cultural zeitgeist. Like, do you know how in society it's like good, it's etiquette to be this way when dealing with someone? When someone doesn't do that, you're like shocked. But a lot of people don't work to the etiquette, the politeness of how our society should be. So so that's why the Starks are naive. But then you've got Daenerys Targaryen, who it seems is not trained to be a leader right at the beginning. She's had an education, but she certainly has no experience being a leader right at the beginning when we meet her. But what we see is that she grows and learns, and she learns from mistakes. The TV show ruined that quite a bit, but the books show her growing from strength to strength. But there is a problem there, is that what happens when one of her mistakes is too big. So there is a flaw in her growth within that growth. But then you have someone like the Lannisters, who they're not honourable. They will pretend to be, if it helps them. They are manipulative, and they're cunning, and they're cruel. And this keeps them in power for quite a huge section of the story. But the flaw is they're not making any friends. There's no loyalty there. But if you watch it, and if you read the books, you start thinking, where do I fall? And I, for example, thought more about the Starks, but I wished they would just be a bit more cunning and politically savvy, and think it's okay to break this cultural etiquette because it's just something that was made up. Just go with what's more morally, ethically right or better in all. But you also, what's great about Game of Thrones, before it's like completely gone under now, is that there were characters who were Starks who were doing that. So I get a little bit of catharsis there. Some people, though, would look at the Lannisters and go, well, regardless of the fact that they're all those 5 things I mentioned before, they're actually running Westeros much better. Economy stabilizes, peace, although they have to go peace through war and traitor and killing a lot of people, they do reform Westeros a bit. What kind of works. But you might think they're right because of how good the character Tywin Lannister is. But some people will settle on Daenerys because her goal is to liberate and bring freedom and kind of crush this old political order that isn't doing very well right now. So you kind of side with her goals and you overlook her mistakes. And I think political thrillers should do this, and even thrillers to some extent. They should provoke you to think about real world politics reflected in your story. So let's start doing some planning. Okay, now we go back and watch the old videos about how I talk about beginning and middle and end. I'm just going to go into it as if you already know. So a good book has, I said a good book then. What I'm teaching you is my methods accumulated from listening to lots of different authors talk about how, and industry experts talking about how to write a book, and I make it work for me. Go watch, go read, and amalgamate all of that into what works for you. I just hope that the way I do it can be helpful for you as well. So I think a good book should have a very strong beginning and middle of end, and then what you do is, so you have one thing that happens in each one, and then you break it down, and then you break that down even further, like a family tree, I guess, and then you have what are basically your chapters all the way along here, so you know what's going to happen in each chapter, and then you can break those down even further into the main events of your paragraphs, etc., etc. So that's the way I do it. So what I need to think about is the beginning and middle end of this political thriller. Now, this was a two-parter, as I said before. So at the end of the last book, what happened was this, and I need to write smaller for this. So someone, I haven't really figured out names yet. You don't have to, as long as you know in your head who you're talking about. So person was killed. Actually, I'm doing this wrong. To help myself think about this, what was the colour of the previous one? That one. So, as a reminder, I'll go with that colour. So, previously, basically. Previously. Okay, so person killed. Now, the way I'm doing it is that in this society, the main society where a lot of the action happens, there's a king, and they're a good king. They obviously make mistakes, they've got flaws, but they're dedicated to being the king. They're dedicated to keeping everything safe and happy. They're good rulers, essentially. So, the person killed, king implicated, removed. Now I'm going to put here legally. Now, removed legally, in that the king accepted that he should step down until the investigation was complete, and it was all done by proving, in a sense, everyone thought he was guilty. So he being an honourable, decent man, stepped down, knowing that if he decided to fight it, he knows how it would look, and he knows what the disaster it would cause. So, but now he was removed legally, however, proved innocent. And then, however, this all happens in their previous book. However, new king already installed. New king was already installed, and that's where that. Okay, hang on. People want the old king. Now, throughout this, Bob wants this for two reasons. A, his guy remains in power, so the replacement is his guy. His guy is in power, which is good because he can now weaken it. Think of it like how, whether you agree with it or not, America is definitely getting weaker because Trump is in power and people are benefiting for it. That's a modern day way of thinking about it. His guy is in power, or civil war, which continually weakens this main political civil war, which will weaken this society. So that's previously, and that's where we pick up. So in order for the political thriller to be high stakes, we then start with because I'm setting us in a city, so the city is on edge. At the moment, there's no, people are arming themselves. People are arming themselves. So that's where the book begins. Now, as I've spoken of before, when you do a beginning and a middle end structure to your book, what should be happening from the beginning, you have your problem, which is this conflict here between two factions. There won't always be two factions. And then you sort of, the book starts to rise towards a solution that you almost get to in the middle. But then at the middle of the book, that solution kind of breaks down or leads to another issue. Essentially the characters go back to square one and they have to build up towards a true ending. So we know at the beginning you've got this, so it has to seem like in the middle there's going to be a solution, but then that's where a backstabbing betrayal could happen, for example. So in the middle of the book, what could happen to... So the city is on edge, people are arming themselves. What we'll do is a weak political solution. So a solution that is solution. Forgive me for any pause. So a weak political solution is agreed. Is agreed upon. However, I'll call it the replacement for now. Replacement betrays them. The king, in that conflict where Fortas and Huxton will be there, the king is captured. Previous king, pre-king, is captured. So it looked like things are going to be solved. It's not a great solution, but it's going to maintain peace and solve this problem here. That's why it's the middle. But then obviously there's a betrayal and the king is captured. Okay, so now Fortas and Huxton are essentially back at, who are main POV characters, are now back at the bottom. And by capturing the king, this has led to the following situation. So the replacement king, takes control of the city by force. So now that means the adventurers like Fortas and Huxton and Adventure Party, are on the run essentially within the city. Are on the run in the city. Now this is where the split is going to happen. So what I'm going to do is FH, Fortas and Huxton, and then Party will split on what they're going to do about it. Fortas and Huxton, they decide, this plays into the theme of the story, they decide to rally all the people. The party decides to go after the replacement king. And what you're kind of actually seeing, this is all of this is a reflection of how to deal with Bob. Because the party splits on how best to deal with this massive problem of this big bad evil character Bob coming back. The party wants to go after the replacement king, take him out straight away. But Fortas and Huxton realise that a much better solution that's going to be longer lasting is to rally all the people to something bigger and greater than themselves. And because this is the problem with our politics today. Take Donald Trump. He's only been elected by a third just over a third of the people who can vote in America, so he doesn't have a mandate to run the country. Tens of millions, hundreds of millions and more did not want him or didn't care to even vote for him. He's completely disregarding the norms of American society and American politics and leadership to keep himself in power. But all the people who could stop him aren't stopping him because they're cowards, the Republicans. They're ineffective governors, some parts of the Democratic Party. When push comes to shove and Trump has broken all the norms of society and etiquette, he's not being arrested. He's not being impeached. The Democrats aren't going to probably bring it because they know they might lose, but also the Republicans aren't going, he's definitely bad for this country. He's definitely bad for America. Let's just agree with the impeachment, even though he's on our political party. So you can see that the problem with having a terrible president is that it actually takes decisions by everyone else making the right decision that could absolutely end him right now and resolve all the problems. Well, not all the problems, but resolve enough of the problems of things to get back to a sort of normality that then they can correct and make even better with better politicians and leaders in charge. And that's what I want Fortas and Huxton to deal with. I kind of want them to rally the people into realizing he's a terrible ruler. What are we doing? Why are we just letting this happen when we actually have all the power just to stop him? So what Fortas and Huxton will do is galvanize the lower level leaders, the people, and any other people of influence to realize that just going along with this because they're either scared or worried, or they're looking around going, well, who else is going to join us to help rebel? They're going to rally that, while the party is going to concentrate solely on defeating him in a climactic, epic sort of action scene where they invade the castle, fight their way through it, and defeat him. And that because that's what some people think is going to happen to get rid of Trump, that some hero will come out of nowhere to take him out, or maybe he'll just, I don't know, die. And that's not going to happen. Really, that's not how it works in our world. That what really happens, unfortunately, is that too many people just let the evil slide, and by letting the evil slide, the person who's terrible and in power just gets more and more power, and we get to a point where you either have a mass civil war, which is terrible, or you have, like, if the example was Nazi Germany, for example, the evil, terrible leader fights way too many people and he's completely destroyed and everything collapses that way. And I don't think Americans want that to happen, and if the same was true of the British, the French, anywhere else, then that's what I'm trying to show here. And if you're writing a book, you've got to kind of think of this and how it manifests in your story. This is my theme. Your theme has to manifest all the way through and be backed up by the actions of and the agency of your main characters. So in a way, towards the end, there's going to be two competing lines. Okay? So what are Fortas and Huxton going to do? And they grab two people from the other party to join them. What are they going to do to change things? So their goal is essentially to convince people they have the power. And people think like them. More people are on their side. Their goal, the rest of the party, is simply take out the leader, attack and take out, let's say, replacement king. Now, I'm not really going to bother too much with this line of thought because it's like classic attack on a castle. Like they dress up as someone, they break in, they fight their way to the top, defeating numerous villains until they reach the replacement king, who turns out is quite powerful. Maybe he's got the old king in like a headlock, and I'm threatening him, and then like that's the classic thing. I'm gonna write that, and it's going to be kind of generic. Actually, how do you spell generic? Okay, whatever. Generic. It's going to be generic because it's like it's a reflection on this. So the reason why it looks generic is that the new way that Fortress and Hudson are going to show in this fantasy adventure is going to be the better way. Now I want to say something here. Fantasy books with this almost generic structure of let's just work our way through the castle and defeat them. I love them. I love them so much. They're brilliant. I like that when the underdog adventurers work their way through a series of more escalating difficult villains to get to the main villain. I love it. It's great storytelling. I'm not going to say never write that book, but the theme of this story is to show a different way of doing it. That like you should, if you love a good story where it's that kind of generic adventurers working their way up, back those up, watch them, read them, buy them, it's fine, write them, they're great, but in a way I kind of want this story to be the deeper thought that people apply to their lives. And it like, in a way, battling through progressive, more difficult things to get to the main villain is also true in history, and you kind of need to do it as well. But this could be so much easier if you also do what I'm trying to do in the theme, which is what Fortress and Huxton are doing. If you just solve some of the problems in society straight away, then it's all like there are less of those necessity to just fight, and there are less people to fight if you solve the little things first. And that's what Fortress and Huxton are going to be trying to do, with some action and adventure that's tailored to each what they do. So this, some of this is in my head and it's hard to explain, but I hope this is helping you. So the rest of the team, their thing is very simple. They have this conversation with Fortress and Huxton, and Fortress and Huxton say, you can go do that, but all you're doing is you're not solving any of the problems of this society. We need to solve these problems of the society so that we can get rid of him, make it easier to get rid of him, and make sure that what comes afterwards is better. Because what the other group are doing, they're kind of pitting two sides against each other by fighting directly back against this replacement king. They're making it so simple that, of course, you're going to get battle lines drawn. And those battle line drawings could mean that the replacement king has all their soldiers and the good guys have virtually none of theirs. Oh, I just realised something that needs to happen. I'm going to write this down here before more planning. The end, the finale. The finale is replacement king defeated, pre-king back on throne. So I'll put adventure party, Fortress and Huxton down here. Now, Fortress and Huxton down here. When they get to the final battle, they assume. So, hang on, I'll do it differently. Oops. So, final battle. In a way, the city has mostly rallied to the old king's cause and getting rid of this new, clearly corrupt guy. The city, final battle, the city has risen for the good guys. The adventure party will see this city marching on basically marching to get rid of everything straight away. And it's a complete degradation of the bad guy's power. He does have so little supporters in the city. because people rose up. They didn't take things lying down, and so by rising up, the new king has completely lost all his power base. The Adventure Party will see this as justification for their methods. So they're going to think that the city has risen up because they rose up. That's wrong. So that's wrong. Because, in truth, the city rose up because Fortis and Huxton did things that showed that the long-term problem of this new king being in power is bad. Convince them. I'll just put convince them as a convince them. So you have this two different. Wait a minute. What is it? It's not showing. Huh. Hang on a second. Something's. I'm gonna reset that. Come back on. Oh dear. That's probably going to make the rest of this episode a bit more difficult to do, isn't it? Now the reason why while this tries to come back, actually, which device is this? Display capture? Nope. Video capture. Deactivate. Activate. Perfect. Something has gone completely wrong there. I apologise. Okay, I'm going to try and talk while I try and fix this. There we go, we're back. So the point of this is that because the Adventure Party think that it's their solution, the classic way of solving things in a fantasy universe, that this is the final split. So where both groups will go their own way. The adventuring party can't see they were wrong, or will be shown to be short-sighted. Fortis and Huxton has proved to themselves and to you, the reader, they were right. And that's the final split. So and this is huge amounts of tension that will manifest in the final book. And in the story, what I've tried to do is show you that this is where a sort of split happens. It's almost like we'll split into two groups. You do this for success. That's what it'll feel like. But it's also the foundation for the final split at the end, where clearly two methods of resolving a problem are wrong. Or, in truth, because this is something else that needs to happen, the theme kind of supports, is that actually it's not one thing that solves the problem, it's multiple things that solve the problems in our society, especially in this society. So how do I keep it interesting by having Fortis and Huxton resolve it? Because I mean, really, you think that the only thing they can do is go and talk to people, and that's boring. I mean, I could try to write some amazing dialogue, but I'm a little bit skeptical of my ability to just do a load of chapters of just talking. No, I don't want to do that. So, right, I need more space. Please turn over. Right. So, the Fortis and Huxton method. The Fortis and Huxton method, what's it going to be? So, talking, Some. Some. But I need action sequences. So this is actually where I have to think about the politics of this city-state. So, so what are the politics? So, I say so many times, I'm sorry. Okay, then, do you know, I'm probably going to end up being generic during this planning stage and then try and flesh it out more. And I am running out of time because I need to keep these episodes under an hour if possible. So, what would be the politics of this particular... Okay, well, there's a basic religion based on Snakar, who is the world snail that the entire world is on the back of. So this is Snakar. There's the king. It's the king position itself. So loyalty to king, and then loyalty to the king. There's also different races. So there could be different sections of the city that are, or maybe it's perceived races and like racial areas, but actually it's not true. It's perceived through like propaganda and that feeling in the air, like a cliche almost, but it's not true. So in a way, what Fortas and Huxton have to do is break these down, but with some action sequences as well. So, and again, okay, so hang on. Remember, at this point of the story, remember, the new king is clamping down with, let's say, the soldiers, the official city soldiers, who will be beneath a more dedicated cadre of people dedicated to the new king who are supporting him. So imagine the historical example of Hitler, the SS, who were essentially above the main political, or also like any other political diehard Nazis, and then you've got the army, which I'm not going to say that the army is innocent, but the army of during this time did do things because they had to swear an oath to Hitler, which trapped them in their sort of honor and obeying law mentality. So that's why these official soldiers are doing it. It's the same thing, but I'm going to break that. So I need essentially 1, 2, 3, and 4 sequences of action where Fortas and Huxton go to them and break their problem. So the religious aspect is, how do they do that? Official soldiers, okay, so soldiers go to priests. Fortas and Huxton defend them. Convince priests. To cart out yes, because that's the central problem in when religion and politics interact. The central problem is that pretty much every religion gets comfortable being a part of the political and power structure of a culture, and the top echelons are usually not so dedicated to following the righteous laws of their religion, and instead want to maintain their power and won't risk it. So and this is something that has to happen in our society, that really religion should step back and focus on the individuals like being better at being righteous and following the the laws of their faith that are really trying to make them better people, step back from the power because the power corrupts. And that's like the lesson here. So Fortis and Huxton will help fight off soldiers coming to secure the priests or back up the evil priests who are in charge by protecting the other priests who are so kind of weak that they don't want to. They're worried that they'll lose their power. They're worried about, do they really go against their high priests who are in charge? What would Snakar think? And in reality, Fortis and Huxton have to show them through their actions that it's actually that this made up strata of the priesthood can be gotten rid of in order for the true ways of Snakar to manifest in individuals and a lot of individuals. So that's basically a fight in a fight in a temple, and I'll make sure that the temple is show it earlier. Not only in this book, but in previous books. So 2, breaking the king, loyalty to the king. So this is now let's say the nobles and officials who, and now this is a problem in our society. I know that America, say, doesn't have nobility, but there are in every society those families, those rich people who are viewed like celebrities, who are viewed as the people that the mass of the people kind of look to. So that's like the nobility, and then you've got your congressmen, your senators, your MPs, your House of Lords, which are the officials who just, when there's someone terrible above them, they kind of go with that. So because they kind of have an institutional loyalty to it, and then the great mass of people beneath them kind of also go to that. And there's this, when there's too little people in a society who realize that the system is terrible, you just end up keeping your head down and not doing anything, and that needs to change. So we now need to go after this. So A, the king was innocent. The law says so. Oh, hang on, there needs to be an action sequence though, doesn't there? So the soldiers of the king arrive arrive to ensure loyalty from government, essentially. But the action sequence needs to be different. Yeah, like a sort of mind control, because that's, in a way, that's what's happened. It's like the people in the people who work at all the levels in government, who actually have the means to get rid of the guy at top if they all work together, they kind of go over to this like mental block in their head that tell them they have to maintain the system even if the system is failing. There's like that institutional loyalty, not to always the people above, but like, this is how things have already been done, we need to do it. So maybe some creature is trying to mind control them, and Fortis and Huxton defeat it, breaking the spell, essentially. That's like a metaphor of that. You just got to break the spell and change the government. So that gets them on here. Now, at this point, since the army is failing, because the soldiers going to these different groups, like they're in these soldiers are sort of righteous and they're sort of good, in that they're just following orders, which is bad. However, they are failing every time they go to capture, and they're not enjoying it, and not enjoying their duty. So since that army is failing and they're not enjoying their duty, the loyal bad guy army so they take over to secure the other races, essentially. And this is going to be the kind of final bit where the army rises up, because it's multicultural. The army is actually multicultural in the first place. And as they resist, because you send an army made of orcs to the orc sector of the city, they're going to go, but these are our people. And you send humans even to the human sections of the city to maintain order, but these are our people. And an army that's actually very multicultural and very mixed will support the idea of a multicultural society, which the king, this fake king, wants to kind of break up, because it means the nation is weaker, so when Bob wants to take over. And that actually is the way to bring the official city soldiers, and then finally that leads to city city versus fake king, I'll say. So I've gone over my hour, so I just need to wrap this up. I'm very sorry, but I want to keep these slightly shorter. So what Fortas and Huxton are doing is they go to different areas of the city where the various institutions that need to change are being, like, the martial law has been instituted by the fake king. The fake king has this loyal army of very dangerous people beneath him. They then are trying to manipulate. That group tells the official city soldiers to enforce the will of the new king. These soldiers are going to these various places to like stand guard and tell them what needs to happen. But they're not liking it. They're doing something wrong by enforcing it. Like that whole thing about I was only following orders doesn't work. It's bad. It's not an excuse, but they're doing it. So that's where the official city soldiers are doing something bad, but they're not happy about it. And unlike in history, these soldiers are going to do something about it, because then, hopefully, if a soldier reads this in the real world, reads this book, realize that that's the higher calling. That's where the duty and honor, and they don't have to be scared of it, because others will be on their side as well, hopefully. So the priesthood. What's wrong with like religions in our society nowadays is that rather than actually trying to be better, more righteous people, which is the entire point of all religions, I mean, obviously, all but one religion are wrong, but there's still that element of trying to be righteous within them. But they always have this flaw of the corrupt priesthood that needs to go. And so Fortas and Huxton will tackle that. When you have your nobles and officials in a society who are institutionalized just to obey and keep their heads down and not fight back and let the person at the top do what they're doing, even though they have the power to fight back, they need to be dealt with too. So because it's like a mental block in them, it's like today Trump is trying to get people arrested and thrown away. Who's rubber stamping that? Lawyers, civil servants, officials. They're just letting it happen. ICE officials are just doing it rather than going, oh, is this good? But some of them are going to do it anyway because they think it's the right thing. And it's like it's this mental block that just needs to be gone. So they go, this is wrong. I'm not doing it. And then the guy on top loses so much power if you do that, and then they can be gotten rid of. And that's going to be reflected in this sort of mind control from a creature that Fortas and Huxton then have to defeat, and they have to defeat it using their own mental strength. And then finally, which is kind of two things, because the city is multicultural, the top guy, the new king, orders his loyal cadre, who are, let's say, ethnically one group of people. They're gonna order this multicultural army to ensure that all the other races in the city play ball, essentially like other factions. And this is where the city soldiers realize they've been doing something wrong by just obeying orders. That there is a higher calling than just obeying orders, because there's no such thing as an army or military that is morally correct all the time. We are seeing this in the world right now. It's necessary for soldiers to go, no, this is an illegal order, and for not only their it's not only to sort of show that the institution of the army is wrong, it's that the soldiers above need to break that spell in their head that we should only follow orders, and instead, no, this is wrong, and this is the higher calling. In a way that, do our soldiers nowadays in our armies, do they realise that there's nothing wrong with not obeying an order if it's illegal? And the system, and actually this is something, I'll put please turn over, something I need to remember to introduce, actually hang on, roughly there. The soldiers they realise the whole system is broken, and this can't be a spell because I've already done it with the political class, the political I've forgotten the word. Anyway, what would break the spell in the real world about the military? Well, actually, I already know. It's they realise the system is broken because they are hurting their people. Like even an army is, even if like an army is seen homogeneously, like we'll take the German army. The German army might seem homogeneous, but Germany was not that long ago, in terms of World War II, a whole lot of different city-states with different cultures within it, and it's like no army is, they're always multi-something in, even if they're all white, because there's lots of different cultures within the idea of being white. So, and this is the spell that broke it, because they are hurting their own people. This made me just think of Terry Pratchett's brilliant book Night Watch. I recommend you read it. I'm going to give you a spoiler right now. In Night Watch, what the main character Vimes does is, while this whole sort of rioting situation is happening in the city because of how poor the leader is, he gets together groups of people and they just cordon off an area of the city, and life goes on normally within the city behind these barricades. And the people trying to break into the barricades are like, they've been ordered to, they're soldiers who have been ordered to do this, even though they know this isn't right, we're attacking our own people. And like, there's a funny scene where one of the soldiers like had to step away from the front line because it was their granny who was on top of the barricade going, "What are you doing, you bad boy?" And he like okay, and it's like that. It's like soldiers should realize that it's okay to not do an illegal order because they're hurting their own people in many cases, or they're hurting people just like them. It's not right. And that can break, I think that can break the spell. In Night Watch, however, like, it kind of all dies down because the ruler is, a spoiler alert, assassinated in a really funny way, but he's assassinated anyway, and everything calms down. But there's some sense that the old guard of the military are kind of thinking, we don't have to go and attack these people behind these barricades. They're doing fine, but they're ordered to by the higher ups. But they're going, but we don't have to. This is fine. But they feel they're institutionalized. But I think that could still be broken if I make it clear in this book that why do you want to attack your own people? And why do you want to attack someone who looks different for you, but over here you got a mate who looks like them, and you get on with them? But we're like, our society is under this spell that only hurts us. And then, sorry, one more thing to read before I wrap up this episode is that the king is restored. Actually, sorry, the king is saved by the rest of the party. The city, so the priesthood, the nobles, the races and soldiers, put him in power again. The city is a better place. Our characters that we've been following in this adventure party see that things change before they leave. It's changed for the better. However, to set up a battle that's going to happen later between the rest of the adventuring party and Fortis and Huxton, the adventurers think it was them. But Fortis and Huxton know what it was. So that's going to reinforce the split that happens now, but also the battle that happens later, but also show that the theme is working. That the theme is working. Because the city is a better place because of all the little things that have been dealt with, not defeating the new king, the replacement bad Bob's underling kind of king in a climactic battle. Right, I need to stop. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Ask questions in the chat, the comments later on, and I hope you get a sense now for how political thrillers need to kind of build, and how you need to think of all the little different ins and outs that need to happen. To resolve the high stakes, especially in a political thriller. Because if I go back to the Game of Thrones example, although Game of Thrones didn't end that well, and the books aren't going to end well at all, what you would have wanted at the end was a resolution to all the political strife. In some ways, it is echoed in the TV series when Daenerys says that she wants to break the wheel, the idea of a turning wheel that puts this group on top, then this group on top, and this group on top. And she said, let's break it, because it's a terrible system. So there was a bit of foreshadowing of what the attempt to have something. But in a way, if Game of Thrones would have been a terrible, an even worse series or worse book, if it ever gets finished, is if it never resolved the fact that what's happening in Westeros, it's always about which family is actually in charge, who sits on the Iron Throne, and it was and all that political wheeling and dealing, which seems fun to watch and is interesting because of the manipulations and the backstabbing and the fighting and the wars, was preventing defeating the Night King. And if business had just gone back to normal without breaking this system, it would have been even worse. And I think that kind of has to be resolved in political thrillers. The high stakes issue with the politics has to be resolved. I mean, yeah, you could write that it doesn't get resolved to make a point that maybe we should be doing that, but I don't know if that's helpful. So in your political thriller, if you're writing one, resolve the political high stakes issue, most important of all, which I hope I've done here, and I will discover if I have or not when I start actually typing it out. So thank you very much for watching. Have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world.